Hi guys, as promised, here are the remaining lectures on the French Revolution. So as we did in our live session, we did phase 1 of the French Revolution. I am now going to continue on to phase 2 of the French Revolution, which is known as the National Assembly. Now, in the National Assembly, the government type, unlike in the first phase where we have an absolute monarchy, we now have a limited monarchy and the rule of the third estate. The major events that happen in phase 2 are the Tennis Court Oath, the storming of the Bastille, the period of great fear, the Declarations of Rights of Man, and the Civil Constitution. So we're going to talk about those now. So as a quick review, France was near bankruptcy. Bread riots all over the country had happened in response to the lack of food in the French country. Remember, this is when Marie Antoinette had said, "Let them eat cake." The nobles, afraid of paying taxes, had called the king a tyrant and were upset with the idea that the third estate was going to take over power and force them to pay taxes, because at this point they had not. King Louis XVI was forced with no choice, and to call together the Estates General. However, the Estates General did not pan out with a great result, and we left off with the Third Estate threatening to leave the Third Estate, form their own new government, referred to as the National Assembly, and remove the king from power. So as they were meeting at the Third Estate, and the fact that this rumor had been spread throughout the Estates General that the Third Estate was threatening to leave and remove the king from power, the king decides to shut everyone out, particularly the Third Estate, from the Estates General. So he shuts them out of the meeting. So the Third Estate goes to the tennis court inside the palace, hits the tennis court oath because it takes place on a tennis court, and they lock themselves into this tennis court, and they refuse to leave and until their demands are heard from the king. In fact, they say that they were going to stay in that tennis court until they create a constitution. Now, so the tennis court oath is this idea that they need to come together and they need to form a constitution, and they need to remove the king from power. So on June 1789, the Third Estate declares itself the National Assembly. They actually end up following through with the threat of separating from the Estates General and start forming their own committee. So the thing that the king was the most afraid of happening, he actually ends up causing. So the National Assembly is the Third Estate. It's really important that you guys understand that. So there's the Estates General, which was supposed to be made up of the three. It was unfair voting, where the two states, the first and second estate, had more voting power than the third. The third didn't like that. They tried to come to a compromise. The other two estates and the king would not compromise with them. So they abandoned the Estates General and they formed their own government called the National Assembly. So when they were locked out of their meeting, they all swore an oath to never separate and meet whenever the circumstances may require, until they have established a sound and just constitution. And this is the idea that they took from the American Revolution, when the Americans separated from the British and formed their own constitution. So the Third Estate awakens, and they proclaim themselves a National Assembly of France. So the National Assembly meets, and the Third Estate hears that the king is going to plan a military action against them. So now that they've separated and they formed their own government, the king is upset, and so a rumor hits them that the king is going to send the military in and send them all to jail. So before he can do that, they decide to attack the Bastille. Now, the Bastille is a fortress in the middle of Paris that holds all of the military weapons at the time. And so they storm the Bastille. It was a fortress and a prison and military outlet. And so they storm the Bastille in France, and they take all of the weapons, and they actually move against the king. And this results into a period of the Great Fear. The idea that both sides are going to face off. The king's going to try to overtake them, that the peasants are going to rise up against them. And so there's this idea of the Great Fear. So the French Revolution then faces a famine. And the famine is a starvation period in which the food is bad. And so the fear of peasants will unleash their fury on the nobles who are trying to reign power. So when you have a famine, you have poor people who are pissed off. This is not a good combination for a peaceful resolution. So factions or certain groups start to form within both sides, and they all start to fight for control of the government. And so then the Declaration of Rights of Man is formed, and this issues the new National Assembly. And the Declaration of Rights of Man is based off of the Declaration of Independence. And it's basically the idea that all people in France should have the right of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And it becomes the new slogan of the French Revolution in 1789. So there is a quiz. Go ahead and stop the video and see if you can answer these questions. So then we have the bread riots. So the bread riots are a huge thing in France because bread was a huge part, a main staple of the French diet. And so bread becomes less available because the wheat product is bad in the famine, and so they can't get bread, and then people are hungry and people are broke and they can't afford what bread is available because the bread becomes more expensive. And again, this is where Marie Antoinette says, "Let them eat cake." And so women start to march on the streets, and they start attacking, because when you have a angry, hangry mama bear, you should probably get out of her way. Don't mess with the mama bear, especially a hangry mama bear. It's just not going to be good. So the Constitution of 1791 then comes into Parliament. So the promise of the Tennis Court Oath is finally fulfilled by the National Assembly, and they create a new government. So now we've gone from the Estates General to a National Assembly, now to the Legislative Assembly. And the Legislative Assembly is formed to create laws, to collect taxes, and decide on issues of war and peace. So basically, they're supposed to serve like a Congress. And the new French Constitution of 1791 makes reforms and changes for the new way the government is supposed to form. So the reforms made by the National Assembly are as follows. The political changes, whereas they declared that all males are equal before the law. They limit the power of the monarchy. They established the Legislative Assembly to make laws and collect taxes, so basically like the Congress of the United States. And they granted all tax-paying male citizens the right to elect members to the Legislative Assembly. Again, so if you own property, you're in good standing, you could vote people into, if you think about it, Congress. The social and economic changes is they abolished special privileges of the nobility. They announced the end of the feudalist system, so they got rid of that caste system of the first, second, and third estates. And they said that everyone will be taxed. All classes will be taxed. They made some religious reforms. They declared a freedom of religion, whether you were Protestant or Catholic, because at this time there was a lot of tension between the two groups. They took over and sold all the French lands. So part of the problem is they felt that the Catholic Church was having too much say in internal French politics. So they removed the idea of the French Catholic Church from power and said, okay, religion needs to be separate from government. And the clergy had to be elected and receive government salaries rather than just being granted them because they were part of the church. So here's a little good graphic for you guys to make that a visual for you. So King Louis the 17th or 16th accepts the Constitution and the National Assembly in 1791. He finally admits defeat. And that is the end of the second phase. So now we're going to start the third phase, the Reign of Terror. So the Reign of Terror is now under a constitutional government. And the major events that happen is that France declares a war with Austria and Prussia. Mob-like behavior takes over, and they eventually take King Louis XVI and Marie to Paris, and they will eventually lose their lives. They abolish the monarchy completely, and they resort to a reign of terror led by Robespierre. So France goes to war. So the Legislative Assembly declares war on Austria, Prussia, and Britain. And some of the radicals believe that the king was plotting to help their enemies. So they go to war with these three countries at the time. And these countries have a long-standing history with France and not getting along with them. And so they declare war, and it is assumed that the king is working with these three countries to try to regain his kingdom back, and that he is helping them with France. So in 1791, the political factions inside the Legislative Assembly start to form. So you have the radicals, the moderates, and the conservatives. And they're all going to fight for power. So you have the left wings, the right wings are the conservatives, and the moderates are in between. So the sans-culotte is the radical part of the Legislative Assembly, and they demand a republic, no monarchy, and they also demand for the France to go to war. So this is sans-culotte is that is that radical part of the revolution. They are the extreme radicals in the French Revolution. So the legislation essentially usually comes up with the idea of forming a limited monarchy and then forces control over the radicals, forming a new government. So we're now on our fourth round of government. We got the Estates General, then we had the National Assembly, then we had the Legislative Assembly, and now we're going to have the National Convention. So we're on round 4 of our government types in the French Revolution. It takes them a while for them to figure out what they're doing, let me tell you. That's why the French Revolution can be kind of confusing. So the radicals take over, and the National Convention becomes now the republics. The National Convention is now the power of government, and they abolish the monarchy completely. There is no limited monarchy. They now have a constitutional republic in France, so the king and queen are of no more. And the National Convention decides to put King Louis XVI on trial as a traitor of France, and he was sentenced to death. And he was executed by a beheading in 1793. His wife, Marie Antoinette, was also sentenced to death and was executed in October of the same year. So now both of them are dead, and they cannot try to claim the throne again. So King Louis XVI is going to be executed, and he says his last lines to the French people is, "Frenchmen, I die innocent. I pardon the authors of my death, and I pray to God that the blood about to be spilled will never fall upon the head of France." So we have a guillotine, and we have the guillotine is a huge part of the Reign of Terror. And I'm going to stop here and let you guys have a self-quiz. So the Reign of Terror starts, and it starts with the fear of the National Convention coming up with the Committee of Public Safety. And the idea of this committee is that they would execute and search out anyone who was against the National Convention and against the freedom and the new Republic of France. And it's led by this guy, by Robespierre and other members. And Robespierre gets a little bit of power hungry, let me tell you, and he starts going on a little bit of a killing spree where he just starts to kill anyone he just doesn't like. And so Maximilien Robespierre is gains the title of the father of Reign of Terror. And he's the head of this public committee. And he, like I said, goes on kind of a killing spree. In fact, he arrests over 300,000 people. He executes 17,000 people by the guillotine. And more people die in prison. And only 15% of those sentenced to death by the guillotine were the nobility and clergy. He starts going after the class of people who were rising up against the nobility. He doesn't go after the nobility and the clergy and the upper. No, he goes after his own class of people. It's not cool, bro. And so eventually, like I said, he gets a little bit power hungry. And so people go, okay, it's time. You know what? We're going to sentence you to the same thing you've been sentencing us to. So they eventually kill him by the guillotine. And with the death of Robespierre, France goes through now a fifth change in government, and now it's called the Directory, or the Third Constitution in 1795. And the Directory is made up of 5-men directory and 2 houses of legislation. All right, pause the video and go ahead and take the self-quiz. So now we have the Directory, or now the 4th phase of the French Revolution. So the French Revolution is now on a new constitutional government. We have 2 houses, the Council of Ancients and the Council of 500. And the major events of the Directory is that we see the rise of Napoleon, and we will talk a lot about him. So the Directory, many of the victims, the Reign of Terror, and fellow radicals who had fallen out of favor with Robespierre and the radicals were called the Jacobins. And the National Convention arrests Robespierre and his allies. They convict them of treason, like I said before, and they end up killing him. So now the moderates, so you remember back that slide where we had the radicals, the conservatives, and the moderates. So the moderates are now going to take their turn of power and see how they do. So the moderates come up with the idea of the Directory, and the Directory comes up, and they follow a lot of the American Revolutions with the idea of a 2-house chamber. So the moderate leaders draft up this constitution, and they put all the people in the hands of the Directory. The Constitution of 1795 sets up a 5-man directory. This is supposed to be like an oligarchy where you have a small group of people ruling, and a 2-house legislator. The clergy and the nobles returned to France, and many of them embraced the idea of this constitutional monarchy. And during this time, they're still fighting the Prussia and Britain war. And so through the corruption of the Directory, France found a new general to lead its forces, and that was Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, Napoleon was an officer under King Louis XVI, and he had become a general at age 24. Now, Napoleon was a mastermind when it came to military. I mean, literally a military genius. This guy knows how to fight a battle. He raised through the ranks very quickly. He was very charismatic. His troops loved him. He commanded a lot of loyalty. And so he rose through the ranks very, very, very quickly. Not only did his people or his troops love him, and did he command with a lot of charisma and force, but he was also extremely successful on the battlefield. He was unbeatable, guys. They could not beat Napoleon. So he was asked to join the Directory. And so, because he was so beloved by the French people, by the French military, he was a great general. Of course, they want him on the Directory. So he joins the Directory, but he overtakes it and he creates the Consulate because he felt that he could do it better than anybody else. As most generals in the military, they have a very high confidence in their abilities to lead people. And so when you put them in a group, they're going to naturally want to be the leader of that group because they are natural leaders. Most generals are natural leaders. And so he decides that he's going to take control. And so he takes the title of First Consulate. And then he decides that he's going to be a consul for life, aka he becomes a dictator of France. All right. So pop quiz for you guys. If you guys take a screen of shot of this and you can answer these 7 questions and turn them into me by the end of the unit, which will be the end of our unit 2 would be, let's have these in by the end of the Monday returning from spring break. So April 1st. If you guys can get these 7 questions to me by April 1st by 5 p.m., I will give you extra credit. So now we enter into phase 5 of the French Revolution, which is Napoleon. So Napoleon is going to end the French Revolution. So we have now switched governments again. We are now in a dictatorship. And the major parts of Napoleon, so he takes over France in 1799. He becomes the leader of France. And at this point, the revolution had gone on for 10 years. We have gone through 5 different types of government, 10 years, lots of fighting, lots of death, lots of changes, lots of confusion. And so the whole revolution starts off with this idea of having a democracy, and they end up with a dictatorship. So in 1804, he declares himself the Emperor of France, and he takes away all election and has absolute power. So they start the French Revolution with an absolute power of a monarchy, and they end the French Revolution with an absolute power of a dictatorship. Can you say full circle? The French seriously don't know what they're doing. So he coronates himself emperor, and he did bring a lot of stability to France. He was, like I said, very charismatic guy. He was very popular with the French people. He was very popular with the French military. And so he brings some stability to France. After 10 years of fighting and changing and all these things, he comes in, and I think the French people really just needed some stability. And so he provides that for them. He makes peace with the Catholic Church, and he brings the church back in. He brings back the military power, and then he also brings back the idea of loyalty, and he brings back this idea of nationalism. So instead of a feudalist system, he brings this idea of, you should be proud that you're French. You should be a Frenchman. You should be proud that you come from here. You should fight for us. You should be proud of the country and fight for it. And so he brings a lot of nationalism. Again, very charismatic guy. People want to follow him. He's very, very good at commanding loyalty and respect from the people that he leads. And so he just leading the French people the same way he led his French military. So he restores the economy. He brings back controlled prices of bread. He encourages new industry. He builds roads and canals. He creates a system of public schools. And then he comes up with this idea of the Nepal Code. He was a study of history, and so he creates his code based off of the Justinian Code. And he preserves the ideas, the Enlightenment, which is awesome because that's what they wanted in the first place. He brings equality before all citizens of the law. He brings religious tolerance, and he ends the absolution of feudalism. So although the French Revolution started off on these ideas of abolishing an absolute monarchy, they had all these ideas. And Napoleon brings all those ideas to light, but still establishes an absolute dictatorship. So same government, but brings in these ideas of everyone having a voice and a buy-in. However, women who had gained some rights under the National Assembly had now lost all their rights. So he did limit free speech, and he used censorship in newspapers. He did establish a secret police, and he did detain people who opposed him. Sounds familiar when this will all be talked about when we get to World War II and we talk about fascism. But he manipulated public opinion through propaganda. We talk about that later in the class too when we talk about Russia, because history repeats itself, people. If you haven't learned anything else from my class, you should learn that we repeat itself. And he surrounds himself with the most loyal people and people who are the most loyal to him. And he sets his family apart from the French people and makes sure his family is well taken care of. So go ahead and pause the video and take your self-quiz. So under the Neapolitan Empire, by 1812, he had built the empire to include the Netherlands, the Belgians, part of Italy and Germany. So not only did he take control of France, he expanded it. And he controls many other European countries by getting rid of their leaders and placing them with friends of his in power. So they become little puppet governments under Napoleon. And he gets this idea that he can conquer the world. So he goes after the British navy, which is the most powerful navy of the world, and he starts to try to take over the world. However, here is his fall. He invades Russia. So he invades Russia. His grand army is 600,000, taken from 20 nations, and he goes to Russia. Now, here's the problem with Russia. Russia is cold. Russia is bitter. Russia is not a great place to fight wars. However, a lot of wars are fought there, and a lot of the times they do not do well because they don't know how to fight in Russian territory, but the Russians do. So he reaches Moscow in October, but decides to retreat 1,000 miles due to low supplies. Now it's winter time. It's cold in Russia. I mean cold, really, really cold. And the Russian winter, the French, who are from a Mediterranean climate, do not know how to fight in a Russian winter. So the Russian army ends up crushing the Grand Army, and only 20,000 people out of the 600,000 people who went there actually survived. And they died mainly because of starvation and cold. Because again, they didn't know how to fight in a Russian winter. They just couldn't fight the elements. So Napoleon is defeated by Russia, Britain, Austria, Prussia, all of which gained up to fight against France because Napoleon got a little too big-headed and wanted to try to take over the world. So Napoleon was defeated, and he, as a result, was forced to abdicate his power, and he was stepped down from power. The French people removed him, and they exiled him to Elba. And King Louis XVIII became King of France. So this was the grandson of King Louis XVI. So he goes to Elba. You can see it right over there. So all the way over there, he gets into this island. However, he escapes. He returns to France. King Louis XVIII flees because he's afraid of Napoleon. Seriously, who wouldn't be afraid of this man? He's kind of, scary, really good military guy. So he takes back over power. So he holds power for 100 days before he returns to the Battle of Waterloo. And on the day of the battle, Napoleon is once again defeated. And this time he was exiled to St. Helena. And there he would remain the rest of his day. He would eventually die there. And St. Helena, you can see, is all the way over there. France is up here, all the way down there. They sent him far away this time. So the Congress of Vienna is then established. So the countries of Europe got together to bring back stability and order to Europe after Napoleon tried to take over. They create a lasting peace by establishing a balance of power and protecting systems of the monarchy. Well, balance of peace, at least until World War I, and then it gets disrupted again, and then again in World War II. And they redrew the maps of Europe surrounding France with strong nations. They restore the monarchies throughout Europe, and that is where we're going to leave off. So I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture. If you guys have any questions about the French Revolution, please reach out to me. Thanks. Have a great day.